Welcome to the second webinar of Coperitas. My name is Mike van Vuren, and I will be joined by my colleague Richard Slimmen.
Good afternoon all. My name is Richard Slimmen, and during this brief webinar, we will zoom in on the differences between the traditional way of drafting transfer pricing documentation and the automated way.
If you have any questions during this webinar, do not hesitate to ask your questions in the Q&A box on the right. We try to answer all questions during this webinar, and regarding any unanswered questions, we will come back to you after the webinar. So let's start with the agenda. Before we take you through the different compliance processes, we will first address some choices to make before starting with the actual compliance work. After this brief introduction, we will walk you through the common manual and software compliance processes. And finally, we will provide an overview, including pros and cons. So Richard, do you have anything to add to this?
Well, thank you, Mike. I think there's one thing I would like to add, and that is that the strategic decisions about how to deal with compliance will depend on the circumstances that are relevant for a specific M&E. And I think it's important to understand that there's no one size fits all. It could also be the case that for now a certain process is perfect fit, but this can and likely will change over time. Now let's move to the compliance options to start with.
So first, we start with a discussion with respect to the choices M&Es should consider before even starting with compliance. The first question to answer is about the level of compliance you should be aiming for. And the starting point, obviously, is the full compliance burden, which results from applicable law. In complete honesty, Richard, I think this could easily become too big of a burden to manage every year.
Indeed, Mike. In practice, I think there are only a few M&Es that really manage to be 100% compliant in all countries. They will often need to balance the available resources with the level of compliance they can actually achieve. And based on a risk analysis, M&Es may choose to differentiate between countries. For instance, some countries which are not material are considered to be less risky, may be excluded or only updated every 3 years instead of annually. And other countries may not be addressed by default, but only upon specific local request. Obviously, this will also require the proper resources to produce documents on a request quickly. This results in an M&E personal compliance package, which is better tailored to the resources available.
And I think, secondly, you should think about timing. If you have to manage compliance for 40 countries, do you start it all at once, or is our workflow spread throughout the year more convenient? In any case, I think the timing depends on the deadlines to be met.
I think an M&E should take into account several types of deadlines. First, the external deadlines due to the possible penalties involved. There's a difference between a formal filing deadline and the kind of deadlines where you need to provide the documentation upon request within a limited period of time. Secondly, internal deadlines may also apply, as not all work can be done at once and certain procedures may need to be taken into account. Internal deadlines will also have to be aligned with the external deadlines.
Okay, and the last decision to make is whether the compliance burden is to be managed manually or with the support of software. And I think M&E should be aware of newly available technologies to increase efficiency. Because nowadays technology is developing that fast that the traditional way of working is, in my opinion, no longer making economic sense. And we expect that the compliance burden will still increase every year. As there's no escaping, the only way to deal with it is to be more efficiently and based upon a structured compliance policy that includes choices about the level of compliance.
I think these choices need to be based on your risk appetite and your available resources. This involves time and budget. If there's sufficient time but no budget, then there is not a lot of need to invest in software directly. But unfortunately, we see in practice that time is more scarce and budgets are restricted to a point that it is almost impossible for an M&E to cope with the workload manually. This may easily result in high risk exposures related to compliance. Now let's look at the manual process in a bit more detail. If we have a look at the manual process of drafting, updating, transfer pricing documentation, we can see the following high-level steps. The starting point is the framework established in-house or together with an external TP advisor, including all relevant technical TP content. So we assume that the actual TP content, the base case, as you might call it, is already available from previous years. The second step is to adjust the text, if necessary, which relates to the M&E itself. For example, local competitors, functional analysis, and stuff like that. The third step is when the data gathering starts. This mainly concerns obtaining financial data and other relevant company data. And this data is often received in different formats like Excel, Word, PDF, whatever you want to think of, and not ready for direct use in the end reports. So the fourth step is the data conversion. This involves structuring and converting the data that you just obtained into a format that can be used for the end reports. And the fifth step to get the figures into the reports. And then the sixth step is to check whether all your appendices are still valid and apply. The last step is to save all final reports and appendices in the correct folder on a designated directory to be at hand whenever needed. And this process needs to be repeated for every unique piece of documentation, every year again. And this is often quite a time-consuming exercise. Mike, maybe you can elaborate a bit on what we believe to be the main challenges.
Sure, Richard. We've highlighted in the manual process in red the steps that concerns the challenges. And I think the main challenges with the manual process are the following. First, with respect to data gathering, the data within the M&E is mostly unstructured and spread across the M&E. And this requires the tax team to collect data from other departments, an example, the legal or finance department. This can be time consuming, and as we sometimes experience, this can be rather frustrating as priorities between departments are not always aligned. Secondly, this unstructured data is complex and not yet ready to be processed into the reports. Converting the data to the right format can take a lot of time. Also, errors can easily be made. And finally, all appendices needs to be available to the tax team in case of an audit or when the documentation needs to be filed. Obtaining and checking all relevant appendices is time consuming, and as these documents are often scattered throughout the organization, additional frustration exists. Now we've discussed the manual process and possible challenge to tackle. So next up is the automated process.
Thank you, Mike. And before starting, I think it's worth mentioning that the most common misconception is working with software needs to change your compliance process. I think that's not the case. In practice, all steps are the same or quite similar, but many of the steps may be automated. As no M&E is the same and everyone has its own working process, we focus on flexibility. And this means Coperitas is able to tailor to your working process. Now, if you have a look at the automated process, certain steps are automated and take less time and effort. The impact of software lies in those steps indicated in the green box. With respect to data gathering, an automated process can be set up, which makes data gathering much more smooth. Relevant data can be automatically extracted from the ERP systems of the M&E using a query or robotics. And if the data need to be converted, robotics or a tailored import routine can support you. This enables M&Es to no longer have to deal with manual calculations in Excel. If all data is in the system and the wording is checked and updated to the relevant year, the last step is to generate the required documentation. The software places the relevant financials on the predefined places. Lastly, Coperitas can monitor whether your appendices need to be updated or documents expire. We see the documentation process can be made quite shorter in comparison with a manual process due to those automated steps. Now that we have guided you through the software process, Mike, can you say something about the benefits of using the software?
Thank you, Richard. Will do. And I think we can conclude that the software process gives you the following benefits. First, transform unstructured data gathering into structured and controlled data gathering. Secondly, use robotics and automation to convert your data quick and accurate to save time and avoid errors. And lastly, use the central document management system to store your documentation and appendices to save time and avoid frustration. So now we've discussed the automated process. So let's have a look on how this works within Coperitas. So one of the core values of Coperitas is that it is built with flexibility in mind. This means that all sorts of data can be used as input for Coperitas. This concerns legal entity information, financial data, and your existing TP documentation. For example, your 2018 TP documentation. Richard, can you explain why you think that it is important for an M&E to be able to use its existing TP documentation as input?
Well, Mike, I believe that the storyline and consistency within TP documentation are essential. And I think software should support this and not force an M&E into a situation where they have to rephrase the storyline in order to be able to use the software. Besides that, it's never a good idea to waste previous efforts, like existing TP documentation.
I fully agree. So that brings us to the second part. When all information is uploaded into Coperitas, the software automatically combines all relevant data, such as entity information, storyline, and financial data, to show the appropriate TP storyline. And for the last step, it is to start with generating the TP documentation for the next financial year. So the output is your updated TP document. In this example, could be 2019, as 2018 was your input document. The updated TP document can be exactly the same in terms of styling. So in example, fonts and colors and your company logo as your current TP documentation. So the input will be exactly the same as the output, vice versa. Let us now have a look at some of the differences between both processes, so more of a comparison. Some manual processes are often time-consuming when insourced and are no match for automated data processes.
Yeah, Mike, I fully agree. When working manually, you either accept not being able to be fully compliant, or you need to increase your capacity. And working with software enables you to save time and focus on other important matters that may add value to your organization, rather than just producing documents. Outsourcing repetitive work due to lack of internal resources may be rather expensive and still time-consuming. Using software generates a high return on investment after 2 or 3 years due to the substantial savings. And whereas the previous differences involve time and budget, the use of software may also have an impact on your risk exposure. Mike, can you maybe please elaborate a bit further on this?
Yeah, I will. And I think it is common knowledge that people may make mistakes, even with the best of intentions. This may result in inconsistencies in your global TP documentation. In that sense, software may provide a way to mitigate the inconsistency risk. And if crucial information is only known to certain employees, the organization runs a risk to lose such information when the employee leaves the company. The current COVID-19 crisis may increase this risk. And software can provide a central storage of relevant data and knowledge in that sense, and therefore can make the organization less vulnerable to this risk. Additionally, the use of software provides for a scalable solution, and I think this is mainly overlooked, and it may grow with your organization without any additional large investments. So now we've elaborated on all differences between the manual and software process. So Richard, in your opinion, which difference matters most?
Well, I think being a TP expert, I believe that from a transfer pricing conceptual perspective, risk mitigation should be the highest importance. However, in practice, we do experience that time and budget often have the highest priority for M&Es. So the use of software may enable them to free up time and budget to better address the value-added propositions.
Yeah, I fully agree. Also as a TP expert myself. So with this in mind, saving time and budget is key. Let's have a look at the options available to start using Coperitas. So Richard, can you elaborate and guide us through this overview?
Yes, thank you, Mike. I think first of all, it's important to note that we are flexible and we will team up with our clients in establishing the best way of cooperation. Depending on the specific needs and resources, we will find the best way to make Coperitas work. The use of Coperitas normally involves three main activities. First, technical setup, which consists of creating a personal environment and user management. Then second, data conversion of the financial data and the existing TP documentation into Coperitas. And then some TP consultancy, which includes TP sanity checks on your TP documentation. And to make Coperitas work for you, we have created multiple options to choose from. These options are not fixed, and the level of support can be adjusted over time. All options include training to get familiar with Coperitas, as we do believe it's essential that users are able to do the best and the most of themselves rather than having to rely upon a help desk. So training is essential. Option A is the lean and mean approach, where Coperitas provides access to a private environment while you take care of the data conversion. Option B is the joint effort, where Coperitas provides access to your private environment, while data conversion will be a co-effort between Coperitas and yourself. And option C is the full service option, where Coperitas takes care of all data conversion and provides you with a ready-to-go environment. If we look into the possibilities of TP consultancy, I think it's relevant to stress that Coperitas works independent from any tax and transfer pricing advisor. And therefore, initially, Coperitas itself will not cover TP consultancy itself. This should be provided either by your in-house TP team or your external consultants. Coperitas will cooperate with any existing advisor as we value maximum flexibility. However, if so requested by a client, Coperitas can also team up with Contour Global to also cover TP content. This can be attractive as Contour Global already is familiar with Coperitas as they have co-developed it and will be able to safeguard the storyline required while optimizing efficiencies.
Thank you. So we now come to an end of this webinar, and we hope that this was informative to you.
And to give you the best impression of how Coperitas could work for you, a free of charge live demo is available. And such demo usually takes up about 1 hour and can take place online, which is helpful in the current COVID-19 situation. Please feel free to contact us through our website, coperitas.com, or just send us a short email to info@coperitas.com.